In 1908, a Lithuanian seamstress named Malka Bernstein lived in a third-floor walk-up at 97 Orchard Street in Manhattan's Lower East Side. Her husband finished collars in a Hester Street sweatshop for $9 a week. They had 4 children. They paid $10 a month in rent for 2 rooms. They put a nickel in the pushke on the kitchen shelf every Friday before sundown. And on what remained, Malka fed 6 people on roughly 38 cents a day. Her children went to cheder in clean shirts. Her Shabbos table held a braided challah every single Friday for 31 years. When Malka died in 1956, her great-niece found a small ledger wrapped in butcher paper at the bottom of a hatbox. Inside were 41 rules in Yiddish. They were never meant to leave the building. They lived differently, not because they were poor, though they were, but because they carried a system out of the shtetl that refused to die in the new country. That system turned a finisher's wage into a household, a savings tin, and a steamship ticket for the next relative across. We watched it work for 2 generations and called it Old World. We replaced it with department store credit and called it American. Most of it died in those tenement kitchens. Number 17 cost the family nothing and added an estimated $42 a year to the household, more than 4 months of rent. Number 12 was so deeply guarded that Jewish daughters who married out of the neighborhood in the 1950s refused to teach it to their own children. And modern behavioral economists now say the principle behind it predicts wealth retention better than income itself. And number 3, the single rule every Jewish wife on Orchard Street enforced without exception, the one no Gentile neighbor was ever permitted to witness, kept 3 generations financially solvent on wages that should have made it mathematically impossible. These 25 tricks were not about being poor. They were about never being poor twice. They were the difference between a family that sent a son to city college and one that buried him in the garment trade. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten money tricks Jewish families on the Lower East Side never shared with outsiders. Number 25. The Friday chicken that fed a week. A single chicken bought from the shosheh on Thursday evening for 22 cents became 7 meals. The breasts went to Shabbos dinner. The thighs went to Saturday lunch. The neck and feet became Sunday's soup. The schmaltz was rendered into a jar. The carcass simmered on Wednesday into a broth that carried Thursday's noodles. A family of 6 on Rivington Street in 1910 stretched 22 cents of poultry across an entire week. By 1912, the kosher butchers on Hester Street were holding back the smaller birds for the families they knew would use every bone. The chicken was not dinner. The chicken was a calendar made edible. Number 24, the schmaltz jar. Rendered chicken fat sat in a ceramic crock next to the stove. Every drop from every bird went in. The schmaltz fried, basted, sealed, and flavored everything the family ate for 6 months. Replacement cost of equivalent butter at the dairy on Essex Street was roughly $11 a year. A grandmother on Eldridge Street in 1914 told her daughter the schmaltz jar was the second most important object in the kitchen, after the Shabbos candlesticks. The daughter remembered. The granddaughter did not. The schmaltz was not fat. The schmaltz was butter the family had refused to pay for. Number 23. The pushcart closing hour. Jewish wives did not shop the Hester Street pushcarts at noon. They shopped at 7 in the evening, when the vendors needed to sell or carry home what would not survive the night. A woman on Norfolk Street in 1912 bought a basket of soft pears for 6 cents that had been priced at 18 cents that morning. Bruises did not survive the simmer. The vendors knew. They respected the women who shopped late and paid cash without arguing past the second offer. The bruise was not damage. The bruise was a 65% discount the morning shoppers walked past. Number 22. The border behind the curtain. Nearly every Jewish family on Orchard Street rented a corner of the front room to a landsman, a man from the same town in the old country. The rate was $2.50 a week, including the stove and a place to sleep behind a hung sheet. In 1909, a family with one boarder cleared an extra $130 a year. When the boarder saved enough to send for his own wife, he often took a boarder of his own. The cycle ran for a decade in some buildings. The boarder was not a tenant. The boarder was a wage growing inside the household's own walls. Number 21. The Sabbath coolant trick. On Friday afternoon, the wife assembled a heavy pot of beans, barley, a small piece of meat, and potatoes. She carried it to the neighborhood baker on Suffolk Street, who slid it into his dying oven for 2 cents. The pot cooked overnight in the residual heat and was carried home for Shabbos lunch. No coal burned in the apartment from Friday sundown to Saturday night. Annual coal savings were roughly $9. By 1915, the coolant fee was the most reliable income on Suffolk Street. The pot was not food. The pot was a work week of saved coal disguised as Saturday lunch. Number 20. The Hebrew free loan. A family that needed $20 for a sewing machine, a pushcart license, or a doctor did not go to a bank. They went to the Hebrew Free Loan Society on 2nd Avenue. The loan was interest-free. The collateral was 2 signatures from neighbors. Repayment ran 50 cents a week. Founded in 1892 with a $95 fund, the society had loaned over $1 million by 1914, with a default rate under 1%. A Russian immigrant in 1910 who borrowed $25 to start a tinsmith trade paid it back in 50 weeks. His grandchildren never knew the loan existed. It was not charity. It was a banking system the community built because no other bank would serve them. Number 19. The Shabbos Goy arrangement. An Irish boy from the next block was paid 2 cents every Friday night and Saturday to light the stove, carry a kettle, or turn down a lamp. The boy got pocket money. The family kept the Sabbath. Annual savings compared with formal household help was an estimated $45. A family on Ludlow Street in 1911 employed the same boy for 9 years. He grew up to be a fireman in Brooklyn and attended the funeral of the woman who had paid him pennies every Saturday afternoon. He cried at the grave. He never told his colleagues why. The boy was not labor. The boy was a small contract built between 2 religions across a hallway. Number 18. The window garden in a tin can. Every tenement window held empty tomato cans with holes punched in the bottom. They were filled with dirt carried home from the parks and planted with parsley, dill, and green onions. On Stanton Street in 1913, a woman grew enough fresh herbs from 6 tin cans to flavor her family's food for 9 months. The cost of seeds from the pushcart was 3 cents. Replacement at the grocer was an estimated $2.80 across the season. The cans were watered with potato water. Nothing in the kitchen had a single purpose. The can was not garbage. The can was a free grocery store growing on a fire escape. Here is what no outsider understood about the Jewish immigrant economy. These women were not running households. They were running a 3-currency operation: American dollars for rent, kopecks sent home to Vilna or Minsk, and a 3rd currency no economist tracked, yichus, the social standing a family carried in the eyes of the shul. Yichus was not vanity. Yichus was working capital. A family with yichus could borrow a sewing machine, marry off a daughter to a respectable son-in-law, and place a child in a better cheder. The schmaltz jar in the kitchen and the seat near the front of the shul on Yom Kippur were the same economic instrument, paid in different denominations. The American neighbors never saw the connection. The Jewish wives did not explain it. The explanation would have ruined the trick. Number 17. The tailor's remnant bag. Husbands who worked in the Hester Street sweatshops carried home cloth remnants the bosses would have thrown out. The wife turned them into children's clothing, dish rags, quilts, and the lining for next winter's coat. A finisher's wife on Allen Street in 1912 estimated remnant tailoring added $42 a year to the household, more than 4 months of rent. The bosses pretended not to notice. The wives pretended not to know that the bosses pretended. By 1914, the practice was so universal that some contractors began leaving a small pile of scraps by the door at quitting time. The scrap was not stolen. The scrap was a benefit the contract never mentioned. Number 16. The pushke on the shelf. A small tin charity box sat above the stove. Every Friday, before lighting the Shabbos candles, the wife dropped in a coin. The pushke was emptied twice a year and given to the synagogue's poor fund. Annual contribution, roughly $1.30. The pushke was not the donation. The pushke was the proof that the family had not yet fallen far enough to need someone else's pushke. A family on Hester Street in 1916 that gave to the pushke for 31 years drew on the same fund exactly once, during a typhoid quarantine in 1918. They paid it back over the next 4 years without being asked. The box was not charity. The box was an insurance policy, paid in pennies. Number 15. The garment piecework at night. After the husband returned from the sweatshop, the wife and her older daughters sewed buttons, finished hems, and tacked linings on garments brought home from the contractor. Piecework rates in 1910 ran half a cent per buttonhole, 2 cents per finished hem. A family that worked 3 hours a night together earned an extra $3 a week, roughly $156 a year. The children learned by watching. By age 10, a daughter could finish a sleeve. The table was not domestic. The table was a small business hidden in plain sight. A family that could afford it bought a permanent seat in the synagogue for $8 a year. The seat was not religious overhead. The seat was an asset. It established the family in the community, secured invitations to weddings where business contacts were made, and gave the husband a place to be seen by the men who hired apprentices and signed loan papers. A seat near the front of a Norfolk Street shul in 1913 was worth more to a tailor's son than a year of English lessons. The seat was not religion. The seat was a business card carved in wood. Number 13. The resoled shoe forever. Children's shoes were resoled by the cobbler on Ludlow Street and never replaced until the upper finally separated from the welt. The cobbler charged 20 cents per resole. New children's shoes cost $1.60. A family with 4 children saved roughly $18 across a school year. The shoes passed from sibling to sibling, then to a cousin, and sometimes to a landsman's child 2 blocks away. By the time a pair finally died, they had walked an estimated 600 miles through 3 children. The shoe was not the savings. The shoe was the cobbler being trusted with the family's arithmetic. Number 12. The invisible ledger. The wife kept the family's accounts in her head and in a small black book hidden in the drawer of the kitchen table. The husband never asked to see the book. He never knew what was in the savings tin. By tradition, stretching back to the shtetl, the wife handled the money. The husband studied, worked, prayed, and trusted. A family on Rivington Street in 1914 saved $84 on a $468 income an 18% rate, and the husband would have estimated the savings at less than half that figure. By the 1920s, settlement house workers on Henry Street recorded the same arrangement in nearly every Jewish household they visited. The ledger was not paperwork. The ledger was a marriage doing math in 2 separate rooms. Number 11. The daughter's earnings pool. When a daughter took a job in a sweatshop at 13, her wages did not belong to her. They belonged to the household. Every Friday, she handed her envelope to her mother, unopened. The mother returned 10 cents for the trolley and a movie, and the rest joined the family income. A family with 3 working daughters in 1915 added roughly $9 a week, $468 a year. That was a year of rent. The daughters did not resent the arrangement. They expected it. The envelope was not earnings. The envelope was a daughter buying her own future from the inside of her family. Number 10. The Landsmannschaft Burial Society. For 25 cents a month, a family belonged to a Landsmannschaft, a mutual aid society of immigrants from the same town. The society covered the cost of a funeral, a sickness benefit, and an emergency loan against death. Annual dues were $3. The commercial insurance equivalent cost an estimated $14 a year for less coverage. The Landsmannschaft was an entire village, reconstituted on Forsyth Street, agreeing in writing to bury each other's parents and feed each other's widows. By 1914, there were over 2,000 Landsmannschaften in New York. The dues were not a payment. The dues were a village, paying itself to stay alive across an ocean. Number 9. The soda bottle return. Every empty bottle was returned to the grocer on Stanton Street for 2 cents. The children collected bottles from the hallway, the street, and the alley behind the building. A boy of 10 in 1912 could collect 30 bottles in a Saturday afternoon and bring home 60 cents, more than a day's pay for a sweatshop finisher. The earnings went in the savings tin. By the time the boy was 14, the bottle money had funded his first long pants. He wore them to his bar mitzvah. The bottle was not glass. The bottle was a boy's bar mitzvah suit, walking down Stanton Street one Saturday at a time. In 1912, the average Jewish immigrant family on the Lower East Side saved an estimated 17% of its income, roughly 3 times the national average for industrial workers. They earned $11 a week. They saved $1.87. By 1985, their grandchildren, living in Long Island, in Forest Hills, in Westchester, saved roughly 6% on incomes 30 times higher. The numbers had inverted. The income had multiplied. The discipline had quietly collapsed. The grandmothers who lived through both eras did not understand the change. They had inherited a working system and assumed the grandchildren would too. The grandchildren inherited the prosperity and lost the manual that built it. Number 8. The Cheder Fund. The Cheder tin and family advancement. A separate tin existed for one purpose, paying the rabbi who taught the sons their letters and their prayers. A penny went in every weekday morning. The cheder fee in 1910 ran roughly 75 cents a month. The tin held it before the rabbi asked for it. A family on Eldridge Street in 1913 paid the cheder for 6 years without missing a single month. The son grew up to become a pharmacist. The pharmacist's son became a cardiologist. The cardiologist did not know the tin had ever existed. The tin was not religion. The tin was a chain of professions that started with a penny dropped in a can on Eldridge Street. Number 7. The refused department store credit. By 1920, the new uptown department stores were offering installment credit to Lower East Side families. The Jewish wives refused. They paid cash. A husband on Delancey Street in 1922 brought home a Macy's credit application. His wife burned it in the stove without speaking. She had watched her mother in Minsk lose a house to a moneylender in 1898. The lesson had crossed the ocean intact. By 1930, the families that had refused store credit owned their pushcarts and their tailoring shops. The families that had accepted it owned their furniture. It was not pride. It was a refusal that fit through Ellis Island and never wore out. Number 6. The Yom Kippur Reckoning. Once a year, on the eve of the Day of Atonement, the wife sat at the kitchen table and reviewed every expense of the past 12 months. Not for taxes, for atonement. Every wasted penny was a small sin against the household. A family on Rivington Street in 1916 cut its meat budget by 11% the year after the wife identified that she had been buying brisket twice in months, when once was enough. The reckoning was not piety. The reckoning was the household's annual board meeting. Number 5. The letter home with $1 inside. Every 2 weeks, a letter went back to the old country with a folded dollar bill inside. To a mother in Bialystok, to a sister in Odessa, to a cousin in Kishinev. The dollars went out before rent, before food. A family in 1910 sent roughly $26 a year to relatives in Eastern Europe. By 1914, Jewish remittances from New York were rebuilding Shtetlach across the Pale of settlement and quietly funding the steamship tickets that brought the next wave of relatives across. The letter was not mail. The letter was the next generation of the family being purchased $1 at a time. Number 4. The husband's apprentice side trade. A finisher in a sweatshop was not only a finisher. In the evenings he repaired watches, sharpened scissors, or hand-stitched custom shirts for neighbors. The wife brokered the work without telling the husband what she charged. A family on Norfolk Street in 1913 added an estimated $42 a year from the husband's evening side trade. The husband thought he was helping neighbors. He was. He was also funding the dowry tin in the cupboard he did not open. The side trade was not a favor. The side trade was a second income, hidden inside the language of friendship. Number 3. The invisible wealth rule. No Jewish family on Orchard Street displayed money. The prosperous tailor wore the same hat as the struggling presser. The wife of a man who had saved $800 wore a wool shawl she had owned for 11 years. A grandmother on Forsyth Street in 1918 taught her granddaughter the rule in a single Yiddish phrase, "As men hot, will men. If they see, they will want." Visible wealth invited the landlord's raised rent. The contractors cut to piecework rates. The shadchen's inflated matchmaking fee. The ganef watching from the corner. A grandmother on Forsyth Street died in 1958 with $19,000 in a passbook account none of her neighbors knew existed. Her funeral was paid in cash from a coffee tin in the pantry. It was not modesty. It was a fortress built out of the appearance of poverty. Number 2. The mother's black book. Before a daughter married, her mother handed her a small black book wrapped in cloth. Inside, in the mother's handwriting, were the rules. How to keep the schmaltz jar. How to read the kosher butcher's eyes when he weighed the meat. How to time the pushcart at 7. How to send the dollar home without telling the husband what the household had given up that week. How to defend the gap. The book was the inheritance. It was worth more than the silver candlesticks. The daughter who lost the book lost the operating manual. Most did not lose it in the first generation. Almost all of them lost it by the third. The book was not paper. The book was a mother handing her daughter a working economy in a language that would not survive the move to Brooklyn. Number 1. Spend less than you earn. That is the whole rule. No schmaltz jar, no pushke, no invisible ledger. None of the 24 tricks above mean anything without this one beneath them. Malka Bernstein's husband earned $9 a week. The household spent $7.30. The $1.70 gap defended every Friday for 3 decades, paid the rent, fed 6 people, sent $1 to Vilna every other Saturday, married off 2 daughters with full dowry tins, and bought a small house in Brownsville in 1939. There was no trick beneath it. There was a gap. Malka held the gap open for 31 years, and the gap built everything. It is the most boring sentence in any language. It is also the sentence the Jewish wives of the Lower East Side carried out of the shtetl, across the Atlantic, up the tenement stairs, and into the children's bedrooms at night. None of these tricks required English. None of them required a bank account, a credit history, or a financial advisor. They required a woman willing to run a 3-currency economy from a 2-room apartment, defended by a system written in Yiddish in a black book her daughter would carry to Brooklyn. The Jewish wives of the Lower East Side were not frugal. They were strategists who had already survived pogroms, conscription, and the steerage hold of a North German Lloyd steamer. America was a country where the only enemy was visibility. They handled it the way they had handled every enemy before, quietly, in the kitchen, on the back of a piece of butcher paper, with a coin dropped in a tin above the stove. We called them Old World. They were not. The tricks died in attics in Long Island and Westchester. The math did not. The math is still waiting in a black book wrapped in cloth, on a shelf above a stove that no longer burns coal, for anyone willing to do what Malka Bernstein did at the kitchen table on a Friday night in 1908. Count the money, set aside the gap, and refuse for 31 years to let it close.